The moment my sister Belle slid that silver DNA test kit across my birthday dinner table, I knew my life was about to shatter. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my father had been waiting for this exact moment for 30 years. My name is Selena Ward. Or at least I thought it was. And this is the story of how a cruel birthday gift, a family secret buried for decades, and my father's secret plan exposed the truth about who I really was and cost my sister everything she thought she deserved. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I learned early that some families are built on love and others are built on appearances. The Ward household was definitely the latter. Our home on East Battery Street was everything Charleston society expected. White columns that gleamed in the morning sun, magnolia trees that bloomed every spring with flowers the size of dinner plates, and the kind of southern charm that looked absolutely perfect in the annual garden tour photographs that my mother Catherine Ward insisted we participate in every year without fail. But inside those pristine walls, I was always the invisible daughter, the one who learned to move quietly through rooms so as not to disturb whatever performance was currently taking place. My older sister Belle was born to command attention. 4 years older than me, she had mastered the art of making every moment about herself before she could even walk, according to family stories I heard repeated at every holiday gathering. Drama club president at Ashley Hall, homecoming queen at the College of Charleston, the daughter who could walk into a room full of strangers and within minutes have every single person hanging on her every word. My mother Catherine absolutely adored it. She would sit in the front row of every play, every recital, every speech competition, clapping louder than anyone else and making sure everyone around her knew that the star on stage was her daughter. "That's my Belle," she would say to anyone within earshot, glowing with pride that seemed to radiate from her entire being. Meanwhile, when I brought home straight A's from Porter God School semester after semester, maintaining a perfect 4.0 grade average that I worked incredibly hard to achieve, my mother would barely glance up from whatever she was doing. "That's nice, Selena," she would say in that distracted tone I knew so well. "Can you set the table for dinner? We're having the Morgans over tonight and I need everything to be perfect." I learned to live in Belle's shadow. I learned to be content with being the responsible one, the dependable one, the daughter who didn't require constant validation or attention. By the time I graduated from the College of Charleston with a degree in graphic design, I had built what I thought was a good life for myself in a small apartment in the suburbs, running a modest freelance design business that paid my bills and gave me the independence I craved. I rarely came home to Charleston anymore except for holidays and the occasional family obligation that I couldn't avoid without causing more problems than it was worth. But on my 35th birthday, my mother insisted I come home for a family dinner. "Just the 4 of us," she said on the phone, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant this wasn't actually a request but rather a command disguised as an invitation. "Your father really wants to see you, and Belle is driving in from Atlanta specifically for this. It'll be nice to have the whole family together again." Something in her voice made me uneasy, a tremor I couldn't quite identify, but I agreed because that's what I always did when it came to my family. I showed up. I played my role. I didn't make waves. The dinner was held at Magnolia's, an upscale restaurant overlooking the Charleston Harbor where my family had been celebrating important occasions for as long as I could remember. The maitre d' knew us by name and always gave us the best table by the windows where we could watch the sailboats gliding across the water as the sun set behind them in brilliant shades of orange and pink. I arrived exactly on time as I always did, wearing a simple navy dress that I hoped would be appropriate without drawing too much attention. My father Richard Ward was already seated, looking tired in a way that worried me. He had recently retired from his career as a commercial real estate developer, and the past year had aged him in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. My mother sat beside him, working her way through her second glass of wine before I even sat down, which was unusual for her. She was always so careful about appearances, about maintaining perfect control in public settings. Belle arrived 20 minutes late as she always did, making an entrance in a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than I earned in a month, her highlighted hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. She kissed my mother on both cheeks European style even though we had never been to Europe as a family, hugged my father with exaggerated affection, and gave me the briefest of smiles before taking her seat and immediately launching into a story about some important client she had just signed at the real estate firm where she worked. Dinner proceeded in the way these family gatherings always did. Belle talked. My mother listened with rapt attention. My father asked occasional questions, and I sat quietly, contributing when directly addressed but otherwise fading into the background like furniture that everyone was so accustomed to they no longer really saw it. But something felt different that night. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite name, a current running beneath the surface conversation that made my stomach clench with anxiety. My mother kept refilling her wine glass with hands that shook slightly. My father kept looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, something sad and determined at the same time. And Belle had this satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, the same expression she used to wear when we were children and she knew something I didn't, when she had planned something and was waiting for the perfect moment to spring whatever trap she had laid. When dessert arrived, Belle reached into her expensive leather bag and pulled out a silver box wrapped in white ribbon. She slid it across the white tablecloth toward me with deliberate slowness, and I felt every eye in our section of the restaurant turn to watch. A birthday gift, she announced loudly enough that nearby tables could hear her clearly. I got you something special this year. Something I think will really help you understand yourself better. Open it. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a DNA testing kit from one of those popular ancestry companies. I stared at it, confused about what this meant, why Belle would give me something like this, what message she was trying to send. My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. My father's face went completely still in a way that frightened me. And Belle leaned back in her chair with that triumphant expression I knew so well, the look of someone who had just played the winning card in a game I didn't even know we were playing. Maybe this will finally explain why you're so different from the rest of us, Belle said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that didn't fool me for a second. Why you've never quite fit into this family the way the rest of us do. Maybe you're just someone else's mistake that we've all been too polite to mention all these years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Conversations around us stopped. I could feel strangers staring at our table, watching this private humiliation play out as dinner theater for their entertainment. But what terrified me more than Belle's cruelty, more than the public nature of this attack, was the expression on my mother's face. She didn't defend me. She didn't look angry at Belle for saying something so cruel. She looked absolutely terrified, her face drained of all color, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. And that's when I understood with crushing certainty that Belle hadn't given me this DNA test to hurt me. She had given it to me because she already knew the answer. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was strategic. This was calculated. This was the opening move in something much bigger than a birthday dinner gone wrong. I stood up from the table without saying a word, clutching the silver box in my hands, and walked out of that restaurant with as much dignity as I could manage while my entire world crumbled around me. Behind me I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped moving, if I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened, I would shatter into pieces right there on the sidewalk outside Magnolia's where everyone could see. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, the silver box sitting on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to explode. That night I couldn't sleep. Belle's words kept replaying in my mind on an endless loop. Someone else's mistake. Never quite fit. Too polite to mention. At 2 a.m. I found myself pulling boxes out of my closet, digging through childhood memorabilia that I had packed away years ago and barely looked at since. Photo albums from elementary school where I stood slightly apart from my family in every picture, as if even then I knew I didn't quite belong. Report cards that my mother had saved but never displayed the way she displayed Belle's drama trophies. Birthday cards signed with generic messages that could have been written to anyone. And then at the bottom of a box I barely remembered packing, I found an envelope that made my hands start shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The envelope was old, yellowed around the edges, and the dust around it had been disturbed recently. Someone had been looking through this box. Someone had found this envelope and put it back, knowing I would eventually find it too. Inside was a single photograph that I had never seen before in my entire life. My mother, looking impossibly young, maybe 26 or 27 years old, holding me as a baby. But she wasn't standing next to my father, Richard Ward. She was standing next to a man I had never seen in any family photo, at any holiday gathering, in any memory from my childhood. A tall man with dark hair and a kind smile, his arm around my mother's shoulders, both of them looking down at baby me with expressions of such tenderness that it made my chest ache. I turned the photograph over with trembling fingers. On the back, written in my mother's careful handwriting, were two words that confirmed every terrible suspicion that had been forming in my mind since Belle slid that DNA test across the dinner table. Forgive me. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by boxes and memories, holding a photograph that proved my entire life had been built on a lie, and I made a decision. If Belle wanted me to take this DNA test to humiliate me, to prove I wasn't really a Ward, to establish once and for all that I didn't belong in this family, then fine. I would take it. But I wouldn't take it for her. I would take it for myself. I would take it to finally know the truth about who I was, where I came from, and why my family had spent 35 years pretending I was someone I wasn't. The next morning I followed the instructions in the kit, spitting into the tube and sealing it according to the directions, and mailed it off before I could change my mind. The company website said results would take 4 to 6 weeks. For those 6 weeks I tried to bury myself in work, taking on more freelance projects than I could reasonably handle, anything to keep my mind occupied and prevent me from thinking about what those results might reveal. My mother called 17 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that started apologetic and grew increasingly desperate. Selena, please, we need to talk about this. You don't understand what happened. It was complicated. Your father forgave me years ago. Please don't throw away this family over something that happened before you were even old enough to remember. But I noticed she never actually denied it. She never said Belle was wrong. She never said the DNA test would prove I was Richard Ward's daughter. She only begged me not to take it, not to know the truth, not to force everyone to finally acknowledge what they had all known for decades. Belle didn't call at all. She sent exactly one text message 3 days after the birthday dinner. For words that told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. Now you'll finally know. 5 weeks and 3 days after I mailed that DNA test, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working on a logo design for a client, I received an email notification that made my heart stop. Your DNA results are ready. I stared at that email for 10 full minutes before I could make myself click the link. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in my password. And when the results finally loaded on my screen, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I just exhaled long and slow because deep in my heart I had known this was coming. The results confirmed what that photograph had already told me. 0 genetic relation to Richard Ward. 0 genetic relation to Catherine Ward. 0 genetic relation to Belle Ward. I was not a member of the family I had called mine for 35 years. But the results showed something else too. Something I hadn't expected. A genetic match to another family entirely. The Brennan bloodline. And a first cousin match, a woman named Grace Brennan who lived in Savannah, Georgia, just an hour away from Charleston. There was a messaging feature on the website, and Grace had already sent me a message. I saw we matched as first cousins. I don't know your story, but if you want to talk, I'm here. My biological father was Daniel Brennan. He passed away 3 years ago. I sat staring at that message for a long time, processing the information that was reshaping my entire identity. My biological father's name was Daniel Brennan. He was dead. I would never get to meet him, never get to ask him about the affair with my mother, never get to know if he even knew I existed. I took a screenshot of the DNA results and opened the Ward family group chat that we used for coordinating holidays and family events. Without typing any explanation or commentary, I posted the screenshot and then silenced my phone. Within 30 seconds my mother called. I let it ring. She called again, and again, and again. On the 5th call I finally answered, and her voice came through the speaker frantic and desperate in a way I had never heard from her before. Selena baby, please delete that screenshot right now. Please. You don't understand what this will do. People will see it. People will talk. Your father's reputation, everything he built, everything we worked for. We moved past this decades ago. Your father forgave me. He loved you. He always loved you. Please don't do this to us. Not an apology for lying to me for 35 years. Not acknowledgement of the pain this revelation caused me. Not concern for how I was handling the discovery that my entire identity was based on deception. Just fear. Pure trembling fear about what other people would think, about how this would look, about damage control and reputation management. I told her I needed time to process this and hung up. Belle didn't call. Instead, she sent a text message that arrived about an hour after I posted the screenshot. For words that made my blood run cold. Well, now you know. That was it. No apology for the public humiliation. No explanation for why she chose my birthday dinner to detonate this bomb in my life. Just smug satisfaction that her plan had worked exactly as she intended. But something about those 4 words bothered me. There was a certainty to them. A confidence that suggested this wasn't just about exposing a family secret. Belle had an endgame here, and I needed to figure out what it was before she made her next move. I called her directly. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Finally ready to talk about it? Why, I asked, keeping my voice steady with effort. Why humiliate me like that? Why now? Why at all? Belle laughed, and it was the coldest sound I had ever heard from my own sister. Because I have been keeping this family secret for 20 years, Selena. 20 years of watching Mom and Dad pretend you were just as much their daughter as I am. 20 years of playing along with this charade. And Mom owed me for that silence. She owed me big. But you wouldn't understand that because you've spent your whole life playing the victim, acting like you were so hard done by when the truth is you got everything you didn't deserve. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What are you talking about? What did Mom owe you? Belle's voice turned sharp, all pretense of sisterly warmth evaporating completely. Let's just say that now that the truth is finally out in the open, certain people are going to get what they actually deserve. The people who earned it. The people who belong. And you, Selena, are going to finally understand your place in this family, which is nowhere at all. She hung up before I could respond. I sat staring at my phone, Belle's words echoing in my mind, and that's when I started to understand. This wasn't just about exposing my paternity. This was about inheritance. My father, Richard Ward, had built a substantial commercial real estate portfolio over his 40-year career. Properties all over Charleston, investment accounts, the family home on East Battery that was worth millions by itself. And he had died 8 months ago without me knowing anything about the contents of his will. Belle had been planning this. She had known about my paternity for years, by her own admission 20 years, and she had waited. She had kept the secret, held it over my mother's head. And now that my father was dead, she was using it to position herself as the only legitimate heir to everything Richard Ward had built. I spent the next 2 days making quiet phone calls to people who had known my family for years. Cousins, old neighbors, my father's former business associates, anyone who might give me information about what Belle had been doing in the months since my father's death. And a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. Belle had been visiting estate lawyers all over Charleston. She had been making comments at family gatherings about how the Ward legacy needed to be protected by blood relatives. She had been asking pointed questions about my relationship with my father, whether he had ever legally adopted me, whether I had ever officially changed my name or if Ward was just the name I used out of convenience. One of my father's former business partners, a man named James Harding who had known my father for 30 years, called me back and spoke carefully. "Selena, I don't know what's going on in your family, and frankly it's none of my business. But your sister came to see me about 6 weeks ago asking questions about your father's estate. She seemed very confident that there would be changes to his will, very confident that she was going to inherit everything. She said, and I'm quoting here, that I would finally understand my place once the dust settled. I thought you should know. 6 weeks ago. That was 2 weeks before my birthday dinner. Belle had planned this entire thing with precision. She had prepared her legal arguments, consulted with attorneys, gathered her evidence, and then she had orchestrated that public humiliation at the restaurant specifically to trigger this chain of events. She wanted the DNA test. She wanted the proof. She wanted it documented and public so there could be no question about my legitimacy as an heir. I realized I needed help. Real professional help from someone who understood estate law and inheritance disputes. I found a lawyer named Patricia Chun who specialized in complicated family estate cases. Her office was in downtown Charleston in one of those beautiful historic buildings with high ceilings and crown molding. When I walked in for our first meeting, carrying a folder full of documents, the DNA results, the mysterious photograph, screenshots of Belle's messages, and a timeline of everything that had happened, Patricia listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that told me she had seen cases like this before. When I finished talking, Patricia sat back in her leather chair and studied me carefully. "Your instincts are absolutely correct," she said finally. "Your sister has been building a legal case to contest your inheritance rights. The public nature of that birthday dinner, the DNA test, the timing of everything, this is calculated strategy. She wants to prove you're not Richard Ward's biological daughter, and therefore have no legal claim to his estate. What she doesn't realize is that biological paternity and legal inheritance rights are two entirely different things." Patricia explained that if my father had known about my paternity and still treated me as his daughter, if he had supported me financially, if he had included me in family events and referred to me as his daughter publicly, then I had a strong legal claim regardless of biology. The question was what my father's will actually said, and whether he had made any provisions for this exact situation. "We need to get a copy of that will," Patricia said. "Do you know who your father's estate attorney was?" I did know. Harold Brenner, a man who had handled my father's legal affairs for over 20 years. Patricia called his office that afternoon and requested a meeting, informing him that she was representing me in matters related to Richard Ward's estate. 2 days later we sat in Harold Brenner's office, another beautiful historic Charleston building with windows overlooking the harbor. Harold was in his late 60s with silver hair, and the kind of face that had seen every variation of family drama that money could create. He greeted us cordially, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He knew why we were there. "Miss Ward," he said, addressing me directly, "I've been expecting this meeting. Your sister Belle and her attorney have already been here making inquiries about your legal standing in relation to your father's estate. They seem very confident that recent revelations about your paternity will affect the distribution of your father's assets." Patricia leaned forward. "Have you disclosed the contents of Richard Ward's will to Belle or her attorney?" Harold shook his head. "I have not, because your father left very specific instructions about how and when his will should be read. He anticipated that there might be complications, particularly regarding Selena's paternity, and he prepared accordingly." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean he anticipated it?" Harold pulled a thick file folder from his desk drawer and opened it carefully. "Selena, your father came to see me approximately 6 months before he died. He was very ill at that point. The heart disease was quite advanced, but his mind was completely clear. He told me that he had known since you were 3 years old that you were not his biological daughter. He hired a private investigator back then who confirmed your paternity. Daniel Brennan was your biological father, an architect who worked on one of Richard's development projects and had a brief affair with your mother." The room seemed to tilt around me. My father had known for 32 years. He had known my entire life and never said a word. Harold continued, his voice gentle. "Richard told me that he loved you completely, that you were his daughter in every way that mattered, and that he was deeply concerned about what would happen after his death. He was particularly worried about Belle. He said she had always been resentful of you, jealous of any attention you received, and that she had discovered the truth about your paternity years ago and had been using it to manipulate your mother. He suspected Belle would wait until he was gone and then try to use your paternity to challenge your inheritance. So he prepared for that possibility." Patricia and I exchanged glances. "Harold," Patricia said carefully, "are you telling us that Richard Ward's will specifically addresses Selena's paternity?" Harold smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen from him since we arrived. "Oh, it does much more than that. Your father was a very thorough man. He documented everything. He hired a private investigator not just 32 years ago, but also during the last year of his life to monitor Belle's activities. He recorded conversations. He collected evidence. And he structured his will in a way that would protect Selena and also hold Belle accountable for her actions." I felt tears start to form in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "What did the will say?" Harold pulled out a document and began to read. "I, Richard Leonard Ward, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. First, I want to state clearly and unequivocally that I have known since Selena Ward was 3 years old that she is not my biological daughter. This knowledge does not change my love for her, my commitment to her, or my desire to provide for her future. Selena is my daughter in every meaningful sense of that word. I chose to raise her. I chose to love her. And I choose now to provide for her. He paused and looked at me. Your father left you 70% of his entire estate, Selena. The family home, the majority of his investment accounts, and controlling interest in his commercial real estate holdings. He left Belle 25%, and your mother 5% in a restricted trust. But there's more. Harold turned several pages in the will and continued reading. I am aware that my daughter Belle has knowledge of Selena's paternity, and has used this knowledge to manipulate her mother, and to position herself as the sole legitimate heir to my estate. I am aware that Belle has made unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts during my illness. I am aware that she has pressured me to change my will, pressured her mother to support her claims, and planned to publicly humiliate Selena after my death. The room went completely silent. Harold reached for another folder, this one even thicker than the first. During the last 8 months of your father's life, he hired an investigator named Derek Vaughn to document Belle's activities. This file contains bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals totaling $48,000 that Belle made from your father's accounts using a power of attorney she convinced him to sign when he was heavily medicated. It contains recordings of conversations where Belle discussed her plans to contest the will based on your paternity. It contains emails between Belle and several estate attorneys where she explicitly stated her intention to have you declared legally unrelated to Richard Ward, and therefore ineligible to inherit. And most damaging of all, it contains a recorded conversation from 2 months before your father's death where Belle told your mother, and I quote, "Once Dad is gone, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about Selena, and then you'll back me up about giving me everything, or I'll make sure everyone in Charleston knows you're an adulteress who tricked Dad into raising another man's bastard." Patricia let out a low whistle. That's coercion. That's financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That's fraud. Harold nodded grimly. Your father knew all of this. He was heartbroken by it, but he wanted to give Belle a chance to choose differently. He hoped she would change course. But he also prepared for the likelihood that she wouldn't. And then he added one final provision to the will. If Belle contests this will on any grounds, including but not limited to Selena's paternity, she forfeits her entire inheritance, and all debts owed to the estate by Belle become immediately due and payable. The unauthorized withdrawals are classified as loans. If Belle challenges the will, she owes the estate $48,000 plus interest and legal fees. I couldn't speak. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My father, the man I had thought barely noticed me, the man who seemed to love Belle more, had been protecting me all along. He had known about Belle's cruelty, her manipulation, her plans, and he had quietly, methodically built a legal fortress around me. Harold pulled out one more envelope, this one with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. He left this for you, Selena. He wanted me to give it to you when the time was right. He said you would know what it meant. My hand shook as I opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written on my father's personal stationery. My dearest Selena, the letter began. If you are reading this, then you have learned the truth about your paternity, and I am no longer there to explain it to you in person. I regret that more than you can know. I have loved you from the moment you were born. You were not a mistake. You were not someone else's problem. You were and are my daughter. I chose you every single day of your life. I watched you grow into a kind, thoughtful, talented woman who deserved so much better than the family dynamics you were given. I watched Belle treat you with cruelty that broke my heart. I watched your mother fail to protect you out of guilt and fear. And I decided that even though I couldn't change the past, I could give you the future you deserved. This inheritance is not charity. It's not compensation for pain. It's recognition of who you are and what you brought to my life. You made me a better man. You gave me purpose. And I hope this gift allows you to build the life you want, free from the shadows of secrets that were never yours to carry. I believed you would use this wealth with wisdom and kindness, the qualities you have always possessed. And Belle, if you are reading this or if someone has told you its contents, know that I loved you too. I loved you despite your cruelty. I hoped until the very end that you would choose a different path. The fact that you are hearing about these provisions means you made your choice, and it means I made mine. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences. Love always, Dad. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I clutched the letter. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand gently. Harold gave me a moment to compose myself before speaking again. There's one more thing you should know, Selena. Your father requested that the will be read aloud in the presence of the entire family only after certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been met. Belle exposed your paternity publicly. You took the DNA test. The results were shared with the family, and Belle has begun making moves to contest your inheritance. All of this was exactly what your father predicted would happen. I'm required to schedule a formal will reading within the next 10 days. Everyone named in the will must be present. And your father specifically requested that the investigator's findings be presented at that reading as well. He wanted Belle to understand exactly how much he knew, and how her actions led directly to the consequences she's about to face. The reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon at Harold Brenner's office. The days leading up to it felt surreal, like I was living in a dream or watching someone else's life unfold on a movie screen. Belle called me 3 times. I didn't answer. She left increasingly angry voicemails demanding to know what I thought I was doing, why I had hired an attorney, whether I seriously believed I had any right to my father's estate when I wasn't even his real daughter. My mother called too, her voice small and broken. Please, Selena, she whispered on the voicemail. Please don't let this tear our family apart. We can work this out privately. We don't need lawyers. We don't need all this ugliness. Just come home and we'll talk. But I was done protecting people who had never protected me. I was done making myself small so others could feel big. I was done carrying secrets that were never mine to carry in the first place. The day of the will reading arrived gray and rainy. Classic Charleston weather that matched my mood perfectly. Patricia drove us to Harold's office, reviewing key points and preparing me for what to expect. Belle will likely be hostile, she warned. She'll probably try to intimidate you or make accusations. Stay calm. Don't engage. Let Harold and me handle everything. We arrived 10 minutes early. The conference room was elegant, all dark wood and leather chairs, with windows overlooking the harbor where rain spattered against the glass. My mother was already there, sitting in a chair by the window, looking 20 years older than the last time I had seen her. She tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet, with her 35 years of lies and her desperate attempts to protect her secret at my expense. Belle arrived exactly on time, bringing her own attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Victoria Hartwell, who carried an expensive briefcase and wore a suit that screamed aggressive litigation. Belle's eyes locked onto mine immediately, and the contempt in them was shocking. She had always been cold to me, but this was something else entirely. Pure hatred barely contained beneath a veneer of professional politeness. Harold Brenner entered last, carrying multiple file folders and wearing an expression of grim determination. He took his seat at the head of the conference table and arranged his documents carefully. Thank you all for coming, he began formally. We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Leonard Ward, executed on March 15th of last year, approximately 6 months before his death. Before we begin with the specific bequests, I want to read a statement that Richard requested be included at the start of these proceedings. He picked up a document and began to read in a clear, steady voice. To my family, I write this knowing that the reading of my will is likely taking place under circumstances of conflict and revelation. I want you to understand that every decision I made regarding my estate was made with full knowledge of all relevant facts, and with sound mind and judgment. I have known about Selena's paternity since she was 3 years old. This knowledge never changed my love for her or my commitment to her well-being. I chose to raise her as my daughter, and I choose now to provide for her as my daughter. Biological relation is not the sole basis for family, and legal inheritance rights are not determined solely by DNA. I also want you to know that I have been aware of attempts to manipulate the distribution of my estate, to pressure me into changes I did not wish to make, and to undermine Selena's place in this family. I prepared for these attempts. I documented them, and the distribution of my assets reflects both my love for my children and my judgment of their character and actions. Belle's face had gone pale. Her attorney leaned over to whisper something, but Belle shook her head sharply. Harold continued reading the will, outlining the specific bequests. The family home on East Battery Street to Selena. The vacation property in Kiowa Island to Selena. Controlling interest in Ward Development Properties to Selena. Investment accounts, retirement funds, and liquid assets 70% to Selena, 25% to Belle, 5% to Catherine in a restricted trust that she could not access the principal of, only the interest. Belle shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane," she spat. "She's not even his daughter. We have DNA proof. This will is obviously the product of undue influence or diminished capacity or—" Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but Belle shook her off. No, I am not sitting here and listening to this. That inheritance should be mine. I'm his actual daughter. I'm the one who worked with him, who understood his business, who earned the right to inherit everything he built." Harold's voice cut through her rant, sharp and commanding. "Sit down, Miss Ward. There is more you need to hear." Something in his tone made Belle sink back into her chair, though her face was flushed with fury and her hands were clenched into fists on the table in front of her. Harold opened another folder, this one containing the investigator's report. "Your father was aware of certain activities that took place during his final illness," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Specifically, unauthorized financial transactions and conversations indicating intent to contest this will based on Selena's paternity. He hired a private investigator to document these activities. I'm going to summarize the findings now." Over the next 20 minutes, Harold methodically presented every piece of evidence my father had collected. Bank statements showing the $48,000 in unauthorized withdrawals Belle had made. Recordings of phone conversations where Belle discussed her plans to use my paternity to contest the will. Emails between Belle and various attorneys shopping for one who would help her build a case against me. And most damaging of all, the recording of Belle threatening our mother, telling her that unless she supported Belle's claim to the entire estate, Belle would make sure everyone in Charleston knew about the affair and my paternity. My mother started crying silently, tears running down her face as her own daughter's cruelty was laid bare in clinical detail. Belle's attorney Victoria looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly realizing she had taken on a client whose actions were far worse than she had been led to believe. When Harold finished presenting the evidence, the room was dead silent except for the rain against the windows and my mother's quiet sobbing. "Now," Harold said, returning to the will document, "there is one final provision I need to read. If any beneficiary contests this will on any grounds including but not limited to disputes over paternity, claims of undue influence, or challenges to the validity of any bequest, that beneficiary shall forfeit their entire inheritance. Additionally, all loans made by me to that beneficiary during my lifetime shall become immediately due and payable. The unauthorized withdrawals made by Belle Ward during my final illness are hereby classified as loans. If Belle contests this will, she forfeits her 25% inheritance and owes the estate $48,000 plus interest and legal fees." Belle's face went from red to white in an instant. Victoria leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear, clearly advising her client to accept the terms and move on. But Belle was shaking her head violently, her carefully constructed control completely shattered. "This is a setup," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This is all orchestrated to make me look bad, to punish me for telling the truth about her." She pointed at me with a shaking finger. "She manipulated him. She must have known he was sick and weak, and she convinced him to write this ridiculous will that gives her everything while his actual daughter gets scraps." Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice calm and professional. "Miss Ward, I would strongly advise against continuing this line of argument. The evidence presented here today documents your actions, not Selena's. Your father was of sound mind when he executed this will, as confirmed by 2 independent physicians whose statements are part of the record. If you contest this will, you will lose your inheritance and owe a substantial debt to the estate. You should consider very carefully whether that's a path you want to pursue." Belle looked at her attorney, clearly seeking support, but Victoria was already packing up her briefcase. "Miss Ward," she said quietly, "I cannot in good conscience continue to represent you in a will contest under these circumstances. The evidence is overwhelming. Any judge would uphold this will, and you would forfeit everything. I'm withdrawing from this case. My professional advice is that you accept the terms as written." Belle stared at her attorney in disbelief as Victoria stood, nodded professionally to Harold, and walked out of the conference room without another word. For a long moment Belle just sat there, trembling with rage and shock. realizing that the trap she had tried to set for me had snapped shut on her instead. "You can't do this," she whispered, looking around the table desperately. "Dad wouldn't, he loved me, he wouldn't punish me like this." Harold's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father loved you very much, Belle. But he also believed in consequences for choices. You chose to manipulate him during his illness. You chose to steal from him. You chose to plan the destruction of your sister's inheritance. And he chose to respond accordingly. This was his final lesson to you. Whether you learn from it or not is up to you." Belle stood up abruptly, grabbing her bag with shaking hands. "This isn't over," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll find another attorney. I'll fight this. I'll prove she doesn't deserve any of it." But even as she said the words, I could hear the defeat in them. She knew she had lost. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. She stormed out of the conference room, leaving her mother, Patricia, Harold, and me sitting in heavy silence. After a moment, my mother stood up slowly, her face streaked with tears and old makeup. "Selena," she began, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. For the affair. For lying to you. For not protecting you from Belle. For being so weak. I tried to tell you so many times, but I was terrified of losing everything, losing you, losing the life I had built. And I just kept putting it off until it was too late." I looked at her, this woman who had given birth to me but had never really been my mother, not in the ways that mattered. Years of hurt and betrayal sat between us like a wall I wasn't sure could ever be climbed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I appreciate the apology." She nodded, understanding that was all I could offer in that moment, and quietly left the conference room. Patricia, Harold, and I sat together in the silence that followed. Harold spoke first. "Your father wanted you to know that he was proud of the woman you became, Selena. He told me that you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and that raising you was the greatest privilege of his life. He hoped this inheritance would give you the freedom to build whatever life you wanted, without the weight of family expectations or obligations." I wiped tears from my eyes. "Thank you for protecting his wishes. For protecting me." Harold smiled sadly. "It was the easiest job I ever had. Your father made everything very clear. He thought of every possible challenge and prepared for it. He loved you very much." Over the next few weeks, the reality of what I had inherited began to sink in. The house on East Battery, the properties, the investments, it was more money than I had ever imagined having. Enough to change not just my life but the lives of generations to come if I managed it wisely. Patricia helped me set up proper management for the estate, hire a financial advisor, and begin the process of deciding what to do with all of it. Belle tried to contest the will despite Victoria's withdrawal from her case. She hired another attorney who filed a petition claiming undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. But Harold was ready. He submitted all of the evidence my father had collected, along with the medical records proving my father was completely sound of mind when he executed the will. The judge dismissed Belle's petition within 3 weeks, and in accordance with the no contest clause, Belle forfeited her entire inheritance. She now owed the estate $48,000 plus interest and legal fees, a debt she would be making payments on for years to come. The last I heard, Belle had been forced to sell her condo in Atlanta and move into a small apartment. Her real estate career had suffered as word spread about what she had done, and clients began to quietly distance themselves from her. The social circles she had valued so much had closed ranks against her, Charleston society being particularly unforgiving of children who disrespected their parents' final wishes. I couldn't bring myself to feel pleasure at her downfall. Mostly I just felt sad about the waste of it all. Sad that Belle had chosen ambition and resentment over honesty and family. Sad that my father had died knowing his daughter was capable of such cruelty. My mother and I spoke occasionally, careful conversations where we tried to rebuild something from the ruins of our relationship. She was seeing a therapist, working through decades of guilt and poor choices, and I appreciated that she was at least trying to take responsibility for her actions. I forgave her eventually, not because what she did was okay, but because carrying that anger was exhausting and life was too short to spend it bitter. I also reached out to Grace Brennan, my biological first cousin who had sent me that message through the DNA website. We met for coffee in Savannah on a sunny Saturday morning, and I learned about Daniel Brennan, the man who was my biological father. He had been an architect, talented and kind, who died 3 years ago from cancer. He had never known about me. My mother had never told him she was pregnant, had cut off all contact after the affair ended, and he had lived his entire life not knowing he had a daughter. Grace told me stories about him, showed me photographs, and I saw pieces of myself in his face, in his mannerisms as described by family members, in his love of design and attention to detail. It was bittersweet, knowing I came from this man but would never get to meet him, never get to ask him questions or hear his voice. But there was also something healing about understanding that part of myself, about knowing where certain traits came from, about feeling connected to a history that was mine by blood, even if I hadn't grown up in it. The Brennan family welcomed me with open arms, no judgment, no expectations, just kindness and curiosity about the cousin they had never known existed. I made decisions about the inheritance that I think my father would have approved of. I kept the house on East Battery but converted part of it into a foundation office. I established the Richard Ward Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting young people from complicated family situations, providing scholarships and mentorship for kids who needed someone to believe in them, the way my father had believed in me. I sold some of the investment properties but kept the ones that were well managed and generating income, using the proceeds to fund the foundation and ensure it could operate in perpetuity. I hired an excellent management team to handle the day-to-day operations, and I focused my energy on the mission, on making sure my father's legacy was about building people up rather than tearing them down. I also made the decision to leave Charleston. The city was beautiful, but it was full of memories I didn't need to carry anymore. I moved to Asheville in the North Carolina mountains, bought a modest house with a studio where I could continue my design work, and started building a life that felt authentically mine for the first time. I made new friends who knew nothing about the Ward family drama, who valued me for who I was rather than what I had inherited. I dated cautiously, eventually meeting someone kind and patient who didn't care about my complicated past. I took up pottery as a hobby, traveled to places I had always wanted to see, and slowly built a life that felt peaceful in ways I hadn't known were possible. On the first anniversary of my father's death, I visited his grave alone. The cemetery was quiet, Spanish moss hanging from old oak trees, the sound of birds singing in the morning light. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and talked to him the way I wished I had talked to him when he was alive. I told him about the foundation, about the young people we had already been able to help, about the life I was building in Asheville. I told him I understood now what he had been trying to tell me in that letter, that love is a choice made every single day, and that he had chosen me completely. I thanked him for protecting me, for seeing me, for making sure that even after he was gone I would finally understand my own worth. And I told him I forgave him for not telling me the truth sooner, for letting me grow up feeling invisible, because I understood now that he had been trying to protect me in the only way he knew how. I also visited Daniel Brennan's grave in Savannah, though that felt stranger because I hadn't known him at all. I stood there looking at the stone marker with his name and dates, trying to imagine what he had been like, whether we would have gotten along, whether he would have wanted to know me if he had been given the chance. Grace had told me he was a good man, devoted to his family, talented and kind, and I held on to that. I placed flowers on his grave and whispered a quiet thank you for giving me life, even if he never knew he had. 2 years after that birthday dinner when Belle slid the DNA test across the table, I was sitting on my porch in Asheville watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was spam, but something made me look. The message was from Belle. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," it read. "I don't expect forgiveness and I'm not asking for money or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that I started therapy a few months ago, and I'm working through a lot of things I should have dealt with years ago. I'm starting to understand how much damage I caused and how wrong I was about so much. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for the cruelty and the manipulation and for trying to take away what Dad wanted you to have. You didn't deserve any of that. I don't expect you to respond. I just needed to say it." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Anger that it had taken her this long to apologize. Sadness for all the years we could have been actual sisters instead of competitors. Relief that she was finally taking responsibility. And underneath it all, a small fragile hope that maybe someday we could have some kind of relationship. Not what we should have had, but something real and honest built on truth instead of lies. I thought about not responding, about letting the silence speak for itself. But then I thought about my father and the choices he had made, about how he had loved Belle even when she didn't deserve it, about how he had given her chances to choose differently. And I realized that part of moving forward meant being willing to leave the door open, even if I wasn't ready to walk through it yet. I typed back a simple message. Thank you for the apology. I appreciate that you're working on yourself. I'm not ready for more than this right now, but I'm glad you reached out. Over the following months, Belle and I exchanged occasional messages, nothing deep, just small updates about our lives that slowly began to build something that resembled understanding, if not quite forgiveness. She told me about therapy, about the things she was learning about herself, about how our mother's favoritism had twisted something inside her from a young age. She told me about losing her career and her social status and how humiliating and painful it had been, but also how it had forced her to examine who she was without those external validations. I told her about the foundation, about my life in Asheville, about finally feeling like I knew who I was and where I belonged. We weren't close. We might never be close. But there was an honesty in our conversations now that had never existed before, a willingness to see each other as actual people rather than as threats or obstacles. My mother made similar progress, slowly and with setbacks, but genuine progress nonetheless. She came to visit me in Asheville once, staying in a hotel because I wasn't ready to have her in my home, but we spent a weekend together walking through gardens and talking about things we had never discussed before. She told me about the affair with Daniel Brennan, about how young and lost she had felt, about how the guilt had eaten at her for decades. She told me about watching Belle grow increasingly cruel toward me, and not knowing how to stop it without revealing the secret she was so desperate to protect. She apologized over and over, and I told her the same thing I had told Belle. I appreciated the apology, but I needed time. 3 years after that birthday dinner, I attended the opening ceremony for the Richard Ward Memorial Foundation's first scholarship class. 20 young people from difficult backgrounds, each receiving full support for college, mentorship programs, counseling services, and a community of people who believed in them. I stood at the podium in the small event space we had rented, looking out at these kids who reminded me so much of who I had been, kids who had been told they didn't matter, kids who had been overlooked or dismissed or told they didn't deserve good things, and I told them my story. Not all of it, but enough. I told them about growing up feeling invisible, about learning that family is more than biology, about discovering that your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. And I told them about the man who had chosen to be my father, who had taught me that love is an action, not just a feeling, that showing up matters more than sharing DNA, and that the greatest gift we can give someone is the chance to become who they're meant to be. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when I finished, including my own. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, one of the scholarship recipients, a 17-year-old named Maya who had aged out of foster care and was heading to college against impossible odds. She hugged me and whispered thank you in my ear. And in that moment I understood why my father had done everything he did. This was his legacy. Not the buildings he had developed or the money he had accumulated, but the lives he had changed by choosing love over biology, truth over convenience, and justice over peace. That night I sat in my hotel room and pulled out the letter my father had written me, the one Harold had given me at the will reading. I had read it hundreds of times by now, but the words never lost their power. You were not a mistake, he had written. You were not someone else's problem. You were Anar, my daughter. I chose you every single day of your life. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in my wallet where I kept it always. And I made a promise to myself and to him. I would spend the rest of my life choosing people the way he had chosen me. I would build a legacy of love that transcended biology and circumstance. I would make sure that kids like Maya, kids who had been told they didn't matter, would know beyond any doubt that they absolutely did. That's the real story of what happened when my sister Belle gave me that DNA test on my 42nd birthday. She thought she was exposing a secret that would destroy me. Instead, she revealed a truth that set me free. She thought she was claiming an inheritance that belonged to her. Instead, she lost everything because she couldn't see that the real inheritance had nothing to do with money. My father's true gift wasn't the house or the properties or the investment accounts. His true gift was showing me that I was worthy of being chosen, that I was valuable exactly as I was, and that the opinions of people who couldn't see my worth didn't define my reality. Belle learned a harsh lesson about consequences and character. My mother learned that secrets always come out, and the only question is whether you control the revelation, or whether it controls you. And I learned that sometimes the family you're born into isn't your real family at all. Sometimes your real family is the people who choose to love you when they don't have to, who see your value when others don't, and who fight for your well-being, even when they know they won't be there to see you benefit from their protection. I learned that being someone's daughter has nothing to do with matching DNA, and everything to do with matching hearts. And I learned that the greatest inheritance anyone can give you isn't money or property, but the knowledge that you are loved completely, chosen deliberately, and valued exactly as you are. That's what my father gave me. That's what I try to give to every young person who comes through the foundation. And that's what I hope you'll take from this story. You are not defined by the people who failed to see your worth. You are not limited by the circumstances of your birth. You are not required to earn love from people who should have given it freely. You are valuable exactly as you are, and the right people will see that value and choose you because of it, not despite it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that truth, even painful truth, is always better than comfortable lies, and that the families we choose are often more real than